Well, good morning. How are you all? We have reached to week 4 now. Quite fast, right? So the topic is interest rate forwards and futures. We're going to divide this lecture into two parts. First, we're going to talk about forward rate agreements based on interest rate forwards. How forward rate agreements are valued, calculated, and used for hedging purposes. Then we will move into futures. In interest rate futures, we have got two. Mainly, we have got the euro dollar futures and we have got the BAB, bank accepted bill futures. Both are almost same, but the calculation is a little different. We're going to focus today's lecture mainly on how to use these two instruments, derivative instruments, to hedge the possible losses in lending or borrowing huge funds. Okay, let us go into the lecture now. The lecture objective is to understand how forward rate agreements, or FRAs we call it, futures, euro dollar futures, and bank accepted bills futures work in hedging. Know how to hedge short term interest rates risk using these instruments. Why I say short term is because it's always we are worried about the next 3 months or next 6 months or maximum within next 1 year. Identify hedging strategies using FRAs and IRFs. These are our main focus for this week's lecture. Okay, lecture outline. Firstly, I'm going to teach you all how to do day count conventions in calculating the exact portion of interest rates accruing for that particular time of involvement of that loan or borrowing. You know, we go by number of days. Normally, we think that interest rates are not worked on number of days. Here, yes, every day, every minute is important. But we are not going to use exponential calculations here. We are not going to use that same theory of this continuous compounding. We are going to see how to use number of days convention. Okay. Then we will move on to forward rate agreements, FRAs. Very interesting topic. Then how to use FRAs for hedging purposes. Then the second part of it, we will move into euro dollar futures. How to use euro dollar futures for hedging purposes. Then we will move into the last part of it, the bank accepted bill futures or BAB futures in short. And how do we use that for hedging purposes? That is our topic today. Okay, some preliminaries. We will see how the day count conventions work. The day count defines the way in which interest rate accrues over the time. Because interest rates are always given to you in percentage per annum. That's right. You know very well. Whenever I said interest rates, we say 5% per annum or 10% per annum. But of course, then we have to see what is built in it about the frequencies of compounding and to how long sub periods we are calculating. Generally, we know the interest earned over some reference period, but would like to know the interest earned over the sub period in the reference period. Normally, the reference period is 1 year. But how many months we are talking about? And we're going to see how many days are that months, because you know very well, January have 31 days, February have got 28 days or 29 days sometimes, March has got 30 days, 31 days. We used to go and use these knuckles, right? January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. So January have 31 days, February have 28 or 29 days, March has got 31 days, April is 30 days, May is 31 days, June is 30 days, July is 31 days, and August also 31 days. Then we follow the September is 30 days, October is 31 days, November is 30 days, and December is 31 days. So depending on which months involved in the sub periods, we can see sometimes it can be 91 days, it can be 92 days, never exactly 90 days for 3 months. For simplicity's sake, sometimes we say 90 days, but here we're going to go a little deeper, specifically how many days. Especially interest earned for a time period elapsed during the holding period, which always become a fraction of the whole. So day count are usually expressed as S over Y, X over Y, because X is that subperiod between T1 and T2, time T1 and time T2 where it's involved. While the dividing Y is always the total reference period of time is 1 year. Again, 1 year has got a problem. In Great Britain and Australia only in Great Britain and Australia we take it as 365 days. The rest of the world, America and other places, we take it as 360. For simplicity's sake, 5 days are off. Okay, interest rate computations in these instruments is based on the money market conventions. LIBOR. Money market rate is the floating rate. Always we take it as LIBOR. We'll talk about LIBOR later. In the US, the amount of interest payable per dollar of principal is computed as L. See, look at this, L times number of days over 360 because that is in US. Where L is the given interest rate, that's typically the LIBOR rate which will be varying on a daily basis. D is the actual number of days involved in the horizon. Okay. Now, we'll start this lecture with a question to ponder. Think about it carefully. As a banker, all of you all have become like a banker now. And you must calculate it as though it's your own money, physical money is involved, until the last cent. Your firm plans to borrow, see the word, put it in bold, to borrow $10 million for 1 year in 6 months' time. Not now, 6 months later, they want to borrow for next 1 year. And is concerned about the interest rate risk. What is the particular interest rate risk here? Between now and the 6 months' time when you want to start, when you're incepting the borrow, you will discuss what is the rate you're borrowing at. But of course, you'll be settling it at the end of the T2. What derivative position should you take to hedge this risk between now and that 6 months? A position that makes money if in 1 year, if the 1 year rate goes up in 6 months. Since you're borrowing, your worry will be that interest rate may go up between now and the 6 months time when you're going to incept into the loan. Or a position that makes money in 1 year rate if the rate goes down. Either way, you should make money. Here normally, although we say there will be 10 million involved here, we can look at it as that 10 million is notional capital, notional principal, where there's money is not actually involved, but we are talking only about the interest rate variations. Since your firm plans to borrow 10 million, not now, but after 6 months for a period of 1 year, the downside risk is that interest rate may go up between now and the 6 month time. That is the biggest risk here. How do you lock in today's interest rate? That's the question. That is where forward rate agreements, I told you, interest rate fixing can happen in forward rates, not in futures. So you can go and ponder about how to use forward rates, which we're going to learn after this. How to hedge the increase in the interest rates in the interest rate futures market. If the interest rate goes up, so what? I must make something after the interest rate going up in the futures market and use it to hedge the 1 year plan of borrowing interest rates, which I'm going to pay higher at the end of that 1 year. So euro dollar futures may become handy. Okay, we'll continue. Right. Now, the second question. Your firm plans to lend. Earlier we saw your firm plans to borrow. Your firm plans to lend 10 million for 1 year in 6 months' time and is concerned about the interest rate risk between now and the 6 months. What derivative position should you take to hedge the risk? A position that makes money if the 1 year rate goes up in 6 months, or a position that makes money if the 1 year rate goes down. Since your firm plans to lend 10 million, not now but after 6 months period, the downside risk in this case is the interest rate may go down between now and 6 months. That's the issue here. How do you lock in today's interest rate so that you can still enjoy the same interest rate for the next 1 year loan after 6 months? How to hedge the interest rate the reduction in the interest rate, hmm, in the futures market, euro dollar futures. Okay, let us see one by one. Okay, the forward rate agreements. Let's see what's the forward rate agreement. A forward rate agreement, or FRA we call it, is the OTC agreement, over the counter agreement, that a certain rate will apply to a certain rate, agreed rate here today. Now AR is a fixed rate. Agreed to a certain principal, that the principal amount may be 10 million, 20 million, 30 million or so, during a certain period of time between now and then. So formally an FRA is an agreement to exchange what? Exchange interest calculated at the fixed rate RK, now K is the fixed rate, for interest rate computed based on the floating rate RM, the actual market rate, typically LIBOR. We'll see next slide. Now you'll be worried what they're talking about fixed rate, and then you're talking about floating rate. See, what you agree in the FRA is the fixed rate. You agree 5%. Are you thinking between now and the 3 months time when you're going to lend or borrow, you want to fix it as 3%? Let's say. But banks will follow a floating rate based on LIBOR. Interbank, London interbank offer rates are the LIBOR, which will be moving in a certain tick mark every day. What happens if that moves? Because when the bank wants to lend you or want to borrow from you, when you are borrowing from the bank, bank is lending you. When you are investing into the bank, that you are lending the bank. Either way, they will start off at what is the settlement rate, what we call the L or the LIBOR rate, as at the date when your borrowing agreement starts. Over a specified period of time, over a specified period of principal, that L is the loan, or a specified period of time between T1 and T2, and which is settled. See, now is time 0, you can see here. You're not going to do anything here, but you can go and make an agreement, FRA, for how long? You're going to normally make between T0 to T1. T1 is where the settlements take place on that agreement. Your effective borrowing starts from T1 until T2, or lending starts from T1 to T2, that is the 1 year. The previous question which I pondered to you, you want to borrow 10 million for 1 year, 6 months time from now. So is time 0, maybe 6 months time is the T1. T1 to T2 is the 1 year borrowing. That's how you look at it. Okay, let us have a look at what it means by LIBOR. I say it so much. London interbank offer rates is the only reference rate for international currencies. Of course, there are so many interbank offer rates. In Paris, it is PIBOR. In Singapore, it is SIBOR. In KL, it is CLIBOR, KL interbank offer rates, and so on. But the famous one, where the whole world use, is London interbank offer rates. A reference interest rate produced daily by British Bankers Association, designed to reflect the interest rate at which banks are prepared to make large wholesale deposits or lending with other banks. Interbank, remember. LIBOR is quoted in major currencies for maturities up to 12 months, except for AUD LIBOR, he ceased quoting in 2013. Now it's not there anymore. The rates are determined by the demand and supply for that particular maturity. As I told you, for the particular maturity of the agreements. Example, if more banks want to borrow US dollars for 3 months than lending US dollars for 3 months, then the LIBOR will go up. If the LIBOR rates are used in loans or bond pricing, example, a borrower taking out a floating rate loan may be charged an interest rate of LIBOR as the variable rate plus a rate for the risk. Always we call it the base lending rate is the LIBOR plus maybe 0.5, which is fixed there. So LIBOR will be varying every 3 months once. For 90 days, LIBOR will change. But the fixed rate won't change. That is the additional. Okay, we shall resume again. Okay, now We have done with the London Interbank Offer Rate. You understand about it. There's the rate, quoting rate. Okay, FRA conventions. Please understand this very carefully because FRA has got its own conventions where you must understand what you will be getting when you are in the long position, what you'll be getting when you're in the short position. For simplicity, the materials on an FRA rates are all expressed with a compounding frequency reflecting the length of the period to which it's applied, the T1 and T2. If T2 minus T1 is 6 months, then it is 0.5. The compounding time is 0.5. I express as semi-annual compounding. If T2 to T1 is 0.25, the rates are actually for 3 months is compounding as quarterly. So it should also be noted that a long position in FRA. See, buying an FRA, you can buy either a long position or a short position. When you go for a long position, that means what do you mean by a long position in the FRA is that you will pay fixed agreement rate and receive the floating rate in case if the floating rate goes up, you make money here. I told you that K is the fixed rate now, you agree, and the floating rate is the LIBOR rate. If you think the LIBOR may go up between now and then about the time when you want to start your borrowing and lending, then if you go long position, then you get the difference. You pay fixed. Let's say fixed is 5%. And you receive floating, maybe 5.5%. Then there's a difference of 0.5%. About 50 basis points you will receive. If you're timesing it by 10 million, you just imagine how big is the money. Short position is alternatively the other side of it. You receive the fixed. See, when the long pays the fixed, the short position receives the fixed. When they pay the floating to the long position, they always think that the floating rate may go down. So they receive a bigger fixed rate like 5%. And maybe they pay out 4.5%. They gain the 0.5%. It's like that. Remember, long position, short position in FRA, don't get confused. Okay, FRA terminology is very, very important. Be careful about this. FRA is described as the start and end dates. I told you conventions of the start and end T1, T2 of the underlying investment period stated in months. For example, 3 times 6 FRA refers to an FRA which will start in the underlying as an investment will begin 3 months from now and end 3 months from there, that is 6 months from now. Can you understand that? Your starting point is now 0. Your beginning time is 3 months from now. Ending time is 6 months from now. So what's the difference between the 3 and 6 is another 3 months. So, for example, a 3 by 6 FRA refers to an FRA, those underlying investment period begins in 3 months time and ends in 6 months time. We use the general notation as T1 times T2 FRA, T1 by T2, with the understanding that the T1 and T2 are measured in months. It should also be reiterated that, again, I'm repeating the same thing. Long position in the FRA means you pay fixed rate, that is an agreement rate, you are fixing it today. But you receive the floating rate. Why you go long position? Because you are determinant that the floating interest rate may go up between now and the T2 time. Okay. So short position FRA is to receive the fixed and pay the floating. You assume the fixed is higher than the floating at the time. So K is the fixed rate. Always the symbol K is the fixed rate. Is the agreement rate AR payable by the buyer in the long position. Okay. E or not E is L, floating rate, is the settlement rate or SR is received by the buyer in the long position. We are looking at it only from the buyer's perspective, whether you are in the long position or short position. Of course, this will be opposite to the other side, you know. If SR is more than AR, if the settlement rate, there is a floating settlement rate, has become higher than the agreement fixed rate, The buyer in the long position receives from the seller in the short position, pays the difference. If the SR is lower than AR, then the buyer in the long position pays to the seller in the short position. That is the difference there. See, FRA works like that. Okay, we will continue. We have seen how FRAs work. Now, FRA payoffs. We have seen the features of the FRAs, what happens in the short, what happens in the long position, and all these things, AR and SR and all this. We'll see how to calculate the payoffs exactly so that we know how much interest we can hedge to gain or to pay. See, consider payoffs to a long position from T1 to T2 FRA with a fixed rate K. Fixed rate is always K, and K is what you agree now, this agreement rate. Suppose the actual LIBOR rate at the time T1, you see, you know very well, from now time 0 to T1 is the time where we are trying to hedge. Because once you go into T1, you will borrow or lend at T1 until T2, where there is the effective interest rate period. But you are worried between now and then. Then the fixed rate payment due in T2, normally fixed rate payment due in T2 at the end of the expiry is principal times K divided by the number of days over 360 if it's not Germany or if it's not Britain or Australia. Floating rate payments is P times LIBOR difference, fraction of the LIBOR, number of days over 360. Remember, K is the rate, fixed rate. Number of days over 360 is the fraction. You have to calculate with that first before you times it by the principal. Principal could be 5 million, 10 million or so. If for LIBOR, it is L and the fraction of the days times by the principal. So the difference in this amount can be written or simplified as principal times L minus K, the difference between L and K for long position, times by the fraction of the days in the reference period. Thus, at time T1, the payoff received by a long FRA, see why we say payoff received at the long FRA, because you long an FRA because you are thinking that the L could be higher than K. The SA, the settlement rate SR could be higher than AR. So, the fraction goes like this. Sorry. L minus K times the fraction of, always a fraction, don't forget it, number of days over 360. And here is L times the fraction D over 360 plus 1. We are in fact discounting it to present value of the time T. You see, usually the interest rate accrues until time T2, but we are discounting it back to T1 so that we will know what will be the amount which we are going to plus or minus with the actual principal amount interest. Note that P is the notional principal and D is the number of days. Well, we resume again. Okay, we see an FRA payoff. We are not hedging yet. We are just looking at the FRA payoffs. For an example, think carefully on this example. Consider a 4/7 FRA with a spot date of March 15. See, 4/7 means the investment or loan or borrowing or lending going to start 4 months from now for a period of 3 months then. So 4 months from now until 7 months from now. So 4/7 FRA. That's what we call 4/7 FRA. That is, the investment period begins March 15. That is 4 months from now. July 15, March 15, April 15, May 15, June 15, July 15. It will start, the T1 starts at July 15 and ends at October 15. Because August 15, September 15, October 15, 3 months from that. Given that there are 92 days, the 92 days will be given to you, you don't worry. In exams and all these questions, in the question I'll give you how many days involved in that. Between July 15 to October 15. Suppose that the principal amount P in the FRA is $5 million. The fixed rate, what we know now, the K is 5% or 0.05. Please pay a lot of attention to decimalizations of the percentages here. You can go terribly wrong in this. Be careful. Okay. We compute the payoffs to a long FRA position. For a long FRA position is what? You pay K, that fixed rate, and receive floating rate or the settlement rate. The payoffs to a short FRA is the negative of this, whatever you're talking about, the long FRA. Okay. The same example continues. Suppose the 3-month LIBOR rate as at July 15 is set to be 5.4. See, you saw the K now is 5. L is variable and will be effective only on the day when the ST starts. Okay, so on the ST day, ST1 day, S1 day, or T1 day, we call the L was 5.4, that is about 0.4% higher. So the difference between L minus K is 0.4% higher. How many decimal places is 0.4%? With 0.004. Okay. Apply this to the principal amount. We obtain SR, that is L, is higher than AR. So the long position in the FRA will gain from the short position. You must construe it like that. Because SR is higher than AR, that means that the variable rate has gone up between 0 time to time T1. So what you agreed was K. Since SR was higher than K, then you being in the long position will receive money from the short position. So the value what you're supposed to receive at time T2, consider this carefully, you are calculating this for at the end of the loan, how much will it be? Because the loan is incepted at T1, ending at T2. So 0.004, that is the difference, times by the fraction of 92 days over 360 days, times by the 5 million, you get it as $5,111.11. But this happens at T2. But you want to determine the rate at T1. So normally we can leave it at that, but for working of it, you may want to discount it back to T1. When you want to discount it back to T1, this happens in October 15 date. But you want to bring it down to July 15. So at the LIBOR rate we obtain is you discount it by the 5.4 rate, because now L is the effective rate, no more the K. So 1 plus 0.054 times the fraction. What you do is get the fraction first, times by this rate, then you plus 1. Okay, inverse it and times to $5,111.11. You get $5,041.54. That is effectively at ST, what we call T1. That is on July 15. But actually you have to settle it on T2 on October 15. What we normally do is, that's why there are two ways of doing it. Either you bring it down to discounted rate at July 15 and again invest this amount. Again, this is a merry-go-round, like, invest this amount until October 15 and you'll get back the same rate here. So effectively it is $5,111.11. This amount that the long position receives from the short position on July 15. That is why we have to discount it, because we want to know effectively at the end of the FRA period how much you're going to receive. So what you're going to do with the money is that definitely you'll invest back at 5.4 for the next 3 months, so that you can settle it together with the interest what you have to pay for the 5 million of borrowing, which is now 0.4% higher than what you expected. You expected at 5%, but now it is 5.4%. So you actually neutralize that 0.4%. That's the reason here. Okay. Now, alternatively, suppose the 3-month LIBOR becomes 4.7. What happened is not up, it's down. So still, you as a borrower, you would have gone to buy the FRA long position. The difference is L minus K. It become negative 0.3 because 4.7 minus 5% will be 0.3% minus. Okay. So applying these to the principal, we obtain that SR is higher than AR now. SR is higher than K. No, this is wrong. Actually, SR is lower than K. SR is lower than AR. The long position FRA will pay the difference to the short position. Therefore, the value of the difference will be at the T2 will be, we always calculate for the T2 level. Okay, this one I will adjust this. It's supposed to be lower than. SR is lower than AR 5%. Please note that I will change afterwards. So at the T2 point, at that 15 October, how much you being in the long position have to pay to the short position is what we are going to calculate. That is 0.003, that is 0.3% minus 92 days over 360 times 5 million goes to minus 3,833.33. That's what you have to pay. That's why there's a minus sign. Discounting this back to July 15, same like what we did just now. We discounted at 4.7% now instead of 5% because that is the effective rate now. 92 divided by 360 plus 1, that is the dividing factor, that is the discounting factor. So you get minus 3,787.83. The long position must pay the short position the amount 3,787.83. Are you all confused now? Hopefully not confused. So we can try some of the exercises in tutorial later. Okay, we shall resume again. Okay. Now we move into how to hedging with FRAs. Earlier we saw how to do payoffs with FRAs. Now is the time we are entering into hedging with FRAs. Suppose you can borrow at LIBOR and wish to hedge interest rate risk on a borrowing of a future period of T1 to T2. But the T1 start from some time from now, that is now is T0. Okay, you can utilize the FRA for this purpose. Here is a strategy. Enter into a long T1, T2 FRA today. Okay, today is not T1, today is T0. If the SR is more than AR, the long position set to gain at T1. That's the discounted value. Then you have to invest the gain to T2. Reinvest the proceeds of the received at FRA of T1, and then the prevailing LIBOR rate at the prevailing LIBOR rate until the maturity at T2. Usually when we calculate, we would have calculated the one at the T2. So just to know how much you got at T1, we have to discount it back to T1 and invest it back to T2 for the same figure. But normally in the exam, sometimes I just write in the bracket that ignore the T1, just do the T2. If the SR is lower than AR, then the long position is set to pay. Then there's going to be negative, they lose. So at T1, borrow the required amount. That's why you have to do the T1 because you have to know how much to borrow. Then anyway, it will come to the T2 figure that you have to pay. Intuitively, you borrow the floating rate and are being compensated by the FRA for the difference between the floating rate and fixed rate. So the net you are paying the fixed rate difference. The reinvestment of the FRA proceed is required because FRA is settled in a discount form at T1 and you have to reinvest it to get back to the T2, comes back to the square one. Okay, now look at an example carefully. It is April 5 now, today. Consider a corporation need to borrow 5 million for 3 months from August 5 until November 5 for 3 months. But between now to there is how many months? May 5, June 5, July 5, August 5, 4 months. So it's going to be a 4 by 7 FRA. Since the corporation is going to borrow, its downside risks is that the floating interest rate may go up between now and August 5. It enters into a 4 by 7 FRA today and borrows 5 million at LIBOR on August 5. The fixed rate is AR and the floating rate in the FRA and is known now is 5%. The fixed rate is 5%. That's what we call the AR. But we consider two possible outcomes of the LIBOR then. On August 5, let's say if the LIBOR has gone up to be 5.5 or the LIBOR has gone down to be 4.5. Let's see how. Show how by hedging the FRA, the corporation's net cash outflow are the same in either case. You are borrowing 5 million. Whether the LIBOR rate goes up by August 5 or it comes down by August 5, it will be same if you can hedge it. You are not locking in the rate, but it will be same what is the net payment. So okay, the outcome A. As L is more than K, the corporation which is in a long position is set to receive the difference of 5 million. That is, the L has become 5.5, so 0.55 minus 0.05 times 92 over 360 days. And did I give you the number of days here? Yeah, it's given here. I have 92 days, right? Okay. So that amount is 6,388.89. Discounting it back to August 5. So because when you calculate this rate, it is at the final payment day, that is September 5, October 5, November 5. Okay. So this amount you are discounting back to August 5, it will be coming as 6,334. How you calculate is get the fraction of 92 over 360, that is 0.255555, times it by the interest rate difference. That at least now it's the L difference. L is 0.55 plus 1. Calculate the inverse of it. And times it by 63. So you get this. Investing this 6,334 received at the LIBOR or rate of 5.5% for 92 days will give you back the same figure here, 6,388.89. However, the corporation now must pay the interest rate for the 5 million what you borrowed. That one you cannot avoid. Now you are trying to get some money for the excess. What has gone up? You thought it's 5%, but it's become 5.5%. So how much is the interest accrued for that 92 days on the 5 million? Now the L is becoming effective prevailing rate. That's 0.55 times 92 or 360 times 5 million is $70,277.63. But because you already earned and invested this money ready, you can subtract it from here. So it's offsetting. So by offsetting the cash flow from the FRA, the net outflow will be 70,277.63 minus 6,388.89. Your net outflow is 63,888.74. That if the L has gone up by 5%. Now we check it out if the L is gone down by 5%. As the L is lower than K, the corporation still in the long position is set to pay the difference. So 0.045 minus 0.5 times 9203 times this, you'll get minus 6388.75. Then discount it back to August 5, you will get it as minus 6,316.11. By borrowing this amount, you'll get back to 6,388.74 is the liability you are having in the loss what you did in the FRA market. However, the corporation now must pay the interest for the 5 million, but now at 4.5%, because the interest rate has gone down. L is the prevailing rate. So 0.045 times 92 or 360 times 5 million is 57,499.88. So the total cash outflow on Yeah, August 5, September 5, October 5 will be how much? 57,499.88 plus the liability which you already incurred in borrowing and repaying back the FRA loss. 6,388.74. So it becomes 63,888.62. Very close to it. Of course, the rounding up error and all become difference between 74 and 62. Can you get it now? Okay, we end the first session here and we'll get into part two.